Good afternoon. Welcome to the Voice of 𝗵𝗵𝗆. In this 𝗵𝗵𝗆 Talk series, we bring you insight from top industry leaders and payment professionals. My name is Sandra Mianda from Paypr.work, and today I have the pleasure to welcome Pragya from Booking.com. Hello, Pragya.
Hi, Sandra. How are you doing? I think this is not our first time. We're doing our second podcast, so I'm really looking forward to it. So first of all, thank you for doing this with me, and also thanks to 𝗵𝗵𝗆 for arranging this for us to share insights before we get to the amazing 𝗵𝗵𝗆 conference in 2025.
Absolutely. I love that we can have another rodeo before we get into the big thing of 𝗵𝗵𝗆.
Yeah.
Today, I think we'll be quite interested to have a little bit background of yourself. So you have a very interesting journey that led you into fintech. What about you start sharing how you came into payment? What was your first encounter and what made you essentially stay in this space?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. Usually people start with okay, it's about payments and something very specific, but you want me to go back into the history. Let me see how to make it short. So funny enough, I think it's all started with an ATM and a bit of confusion. Let me explain it. So I was in Dubai for my first job, and I vividly remember the time I was working at the Emirates National Bank of Dubai. I was a software engineer and over there working on the core banking platform. And when I went there for the first time, my company set me up with the card, the money and everything. So I go to an ATM machine, put my card from an Indian bank, and the money is coming out from a bank in Dubai. And I'm like, how on earth is this working? And luckily, I had the resources and the engineering skills to kind of dive into that code myself and understand that how it all works behind the scenes. So I would say I stumbled into payments by chance, but I stayed by choice.
Yeah, and I think it's probably fairly common. I don't know many people that actually had an understanding of payment, and certainly seeing how the industry is fast evolving. Whatever you understood back then, it's probably completely obsolete, considering.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it just changes at such a speed, and it's so dynamic that you need to stay up to date because the knowledge in payment becomes redundant after one point in time. So you need to stay up to date with the regulations, with everything that's going around in the up and coming products, and also at the same time how that's implemented at up to some level technically, because I'm a product manager in fintech, so I wouldn't go into too much technical, but it's always nice to know how it's working behind the scenes. Which kind of I'm just thinking, speaking of 𝗵𝗵𝗆, that's where we kind of get to know these are the conferences where we go and learn about what's up and coming, the latest trends. And speaking of that, Sandra, the merchant payment ecosystem has been changing at lightning speed, right? So what are some of the biggest shifts that you have noticed in the industry lately?
Well, I think it's interesting that you're actually posing me that question because, of course, from the perspective of where I'm sitting, first and foremost, I think you are not exaggerating when you're talking about lightning speed. This is pretty much the way we are sort of navigating that space. What comes with that, I probably would sum it up by three different things. You've got the customer expectation preferences that are leading essentially some of the innovations that the platform have to adapt. But what you also have is some interesting level of sophistication as well that is emerging around effectively the infrastructure that is supporting this innovation. And that's now leading to some very interesting, use cases that are solving problems, but they're also creating a new demand, right? To start engaging and changing essentially the trends, creating an adoption. So if I think about, because you started, I believe that was Amazon.
I didn't go that back, did I? No. So I started as an engineer in a core banking software solution and worked in that for around 5 years, and then moved slowly to consulting for 1.5 years with EY, then to Amazon for a bit, and then I joined Booking. But with Amazon and Booking, I have been on the B2B side of things.
Interesting. Then I think you probably definitely a good one to give us some perspective from what you've been exposed to, understanding what do you think effectively has really started to influence the innovations that we're seeing, the consumer behavior, and especially probably from the context of your marketplace and e-commerce ecosystem.
Oh, great. Another great question. So I think from my experience, I will kind of dive into both working at Amazon and also at Booking right now. I think I've seen firsthand how customer preferences drive the fintech innovations in the marketplaces, like e-commerce or travel, right? And how the product develops around it, because the main offering is one of these services. And then payments is in the back end kind of trying to fulfill them. So if there is no demand and supply, you might just have the best payment integration or a product out there, but up to what end? So that's the question. So in peak, and as the question you asked about the difference in consumer behaviors, if I'm to think about it right now, it would be that in e-commerce, the customer expectations are more about speed and convenience, right? So if you're kind of trying to buy a product, put it in your cart, and you want it to be convenient, to be delivered, you want the safety, the trust, you want quick, frictionless checkout, flexible payment options, so on and so forth. So that's where your options like buy now, pay later, wallets, rewards, that really took off. But if you talk about the travel industry, the behavior is somewhat different, I would say slightly, because travel often involves a larger amount, and a longer time duration. Because bookers, like as a guest, if I want to travel somewhere, I will not book immediately. I might think about it, or I might take 3 or 4 options of accommodation, and maybe cancel few of them when I get closer to that date. So in that sense, there's a high demand of options like holding a booking and not having to kind of immediately pay for it, or even modifying it later. I book for 10 nights, I change my mind, I stay 2 extra, I reduce it to 2 nights, saying I have to head back to Amsterdam, right? So that's kind of 2 different flavors, and depending on that. So in general, the goal of both the industries is to enhance the customer experience, but the approach varies.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to see essentially whilst payment, it's essentially, one layer that's supposed to, service the same demand, right? Connecting with the customer, adapting to their preferences. But when you have those nuances that you have like explained in terms of the marketplace and the e-commerce, just understanding those dynamics essentially guide towards different product integration and strategy, right? Because at the bottom end, the consumer, the demands are being fulfilled, or the experience that you led them through to buy or to book secure sales from them are fundamentally different, right? So that's, I guess, one of the interesting play for the service providers, right?
Yeah, indeed. I have a question for you. I know you're asking the questions, but I'm just going to turn the table around and I'm going to ask, you touched upon a very nice point. We talked about consumer behaviors, and based on that, merchants need to kind of meet up these expectations, so to say. How do tech industry, for example, the fintechs, the payment service providers, how do they kind of need to adapt to meet these demands of the consumers and help out the merchants to provide those solutions?
Yeah, well, I guess there is not necessarily one straight answer to that. Of course, I've got a perspective driven by what I've been exposed to. But I think, what I'm seeing fundamentally is that merchants and service providers need to work in partnership. I mean, first and foremost, because, the payment service providers are building fantastic ecosystem of features, of products that are solving problem, that may be legacy problem or problem that we're seeing today. But nobody can quite anticipate really, where the industry is going. I mean, if COVID taught us anything, is how fundamentally the infrastructure has changed. And when you see the different players in the ecosystem and how payments start becoming embedded to not payment, to not traditional, I would say, financial institution. So that essentially dictates how agile technology needs to be, how adaptable the technology needs to be, how sort of aware of the nuances, the requirements and the trends that they need to cater for. And I believe that the best way, and potentially one of the only way to do that, it's truly to work in partnership, right? It's truly understanding not only where you are today, but leveraging the partnership with the merchants to utilize them as your case study, right? Because they have an operational, challenge and need that essentially evolves, as they grow, they go through new markets, and that becomes probably the best use case to really enhance your own technology, right? Because nobody's got it all figuring out. I think there's a level of humility, a level of challenging each other, right? Because, it is not a straight line curve, and nobody can pretend to come forward and say that they got it all sorted. So that vulnerability essentially for me lead to growth.
Yeah, perfect. And I like completely, I can relate to that, because I think collaboration within the payment ecosystem is absolutely critical to meeting the customer demands. And it's no longer about one player delivering everything. It's like kind of assembling an Avengers team, so to say. Like, you have lots of characters having their own powers, own strengths, and then you get all of them together to kind of build that amazing extreme experience. And we have seen in the past, like banks and technology companies worked on tokenization. We had payment service providers and merchants to build something like buy now, pay later. Even more so with more embedded finance products, where banks and fintech come together to have more and more products these days, which, by the way, is also my topic that I was speaking at MPE. So not to give too many spoilers. Yes, but not. Yes, it's around the merchant, basically embedded finance, like how it sneaks into the everyday life. Like basically about, so the idea is like payments in general is kind of a last click thing, right? Like where you have made everything all in order. You go to the last page, you figure out how you want to pay and when you want to pay and how much you want to pay. Yeah. And how so all of that, I think I covered how. But now when we go talk about embedded finance, it kind of sneaks in before that. Do you want an insurance? Do you want a customer loan, like buy now, pay later? Do you want to use something like an Apple Card? And those kind of options. So it kind of sneaks in, and then you put the whole reward system and the whole closed loop loyalty system, and then the payment actually drives the business instead of just being at the last mile. So yes, super interesting. And which I think if I keep like kind of thinking about it, I also think about like what are the kind of opportunities for merchants here? Like what should they be focusing on? Like with all these embedded finance and these kind of topics coming up. I feel that compliance is the key. Yeah, like we talk about all these opportunities for merchants, but with the evolving with the evolving products and with the evolving the smarter the companies get, more smart the regulations get. So regulations are becoming even more strict, and I think if the merchants can get their compliance game right, then that will be like a game changer. Because if the compliance is right, if you can go through that obstacle course and reach the end, then you have more and more like a playground to build more evolutionary and customer-centric products.
Yeah. It's interesting that you're actually using regulation and compliance, because, I've been 15 years in this space, and you would never start a conversation. I mean, it would be the elephant in the room, right? I mean, nobody wants to talk compliance because it was still like a stopper to innovation. But what you mentioned is really interesting, because you're right. I'm seeing the same shift whereby this is starting to become the trigger and really the leading conversation. It's no longer necessarily about the cost, although the cost still has a big weight, right, to play into the equation. But elements like, how do you secure, my infrastructure? How do you help me defend this growing problem that we see with chargebacks? How do we comply with these continuously changing, right, mandates that are just coming, whether it's from, the schemes, from other bodies, from the government regulation? But that becomes really interesting to see that it's not just a stopper, it's becoming an enabler. And so your point to put that at the forefront to essentially have sustaining, the growth and the direction of a business. I think it's definitely a very pertinent point today in the context of what we're seeing. And so
I'm so happy that we're like agreeing on most of the things, because earlier I was like, maybe it's different. Maybe we will have like a debate about something, which kind of, I think we are also coming close to the time. So what would be like your one advice for you, like for the broader merchant and the payment industry, with all these things that we consider, like the consumer behavior, what merchants need to do, how the technology providers need to kind of help bridge this gap? With all of that, what would be your advice? And I'm not going to limit you to one advice. So in general, do you have any advice for the broader community out there?
I love that you keep asking me questions. You dodging the question. We want to hear about your expertise and what is essentially the, sort of the balance that you see there. So, without necessarily, going too much into this, I think there's a lot of the point that we already covered, right? Today, it's all about, embracing the technology, understanding what technology, like just that additional layer of, enhancement to your infrastructure, what that can open in terms of your ecosystem. I think it's, of course, about the security, which for me has taken prevalence above the UX. It's kind of hand in hand, UX experience and securing, right? The data, limiting, mitigating the exposure to fraud. Understanding this crazy market, right? Nowadays, everyone have an opportunity to operate across market, right? They can become a global player. When I mean global player, in the sense of they can attract international sales and be seen, to tap into other cross-border market fairly easily by having the right integration that essentially lead you to open up, your door to smaller additional markets. So I think all of those approach not only are bringing complexity, they're bringing opportunity. It's all part of this fantastic globalization phase that we're going through. But clearly the question remains, right, Pragya, what is your advice considering the challenging landscape? What are the key lessons that you think? What do you want to leave people with in terms of what they should be looking at to make an impact? And I'm talking from a broader perspective, right? Because you have an interesting hat whereby, you stumble into payment and stayed into it. And I believe there's a lot of people that are starting to pick an interest and they want to come into payment. So not just from a perspective of an outsider that wants to come into payment, but also from the people that are navigating this challenge and this complex landscape. What do you have to say and can leave us with something?
Okay. This question is like a curveball, similar to how, fintech is. Like fintech can throw you a lot of curveballs, Sandra. But one thing which I have learned is that flexibility is the key. Payment is like a living and a breathing beast. The industry is always evolving. What's cutting edge one day can be outdated the very next. Yeah. So I feel the lesson here would be kind of like stay hungry, which I always say, stay hungry, stay humble, and stay ahead of the game. And that's what will kind of help anyone. Like if you're an individual trying to understand payments, make an impact in payment, or you're on any side, like a unicorn or an exist like a traditional conventional bank, and you have to open banking scenes to the world out there. Right. That's one. And I think like early on in my career, I was able to kind of understand this with the help of the technology background, complemented with the payments industry space. And I think the most pivotal or the most important moment for me was when I realized that as complex as payments is, it's a very customer-facing product. That's the thing I understand, because it's about trust. It's about somebody's money somewhere. So for customers out there, it's not about how fascinating or how cutting edge or smooth your technology is. It's about, am I getting paid at the right time? Am I having the most seamless experience that should be? So it's about an emotion. We say it, yeah. So that's, I think, very important thing to remember, and always focus on this trust, the customer experience, the compliance aspect, because without those, you don't have a product, you have a problem.
Yeah, no, I love how you sum this up, because you're right. I think MP actually embraced that very well by essentially connecting this community, which is led by people, because ultimately it's people, and people are made from emotion, experience, and they are essentially living through and being dictated by what makes sense and doesn't make sense. And so the UX within payment, it's extremely key. So that's fantastic for us to have the opportunity to be able to gather together in a place which is safe, where we can learn, exchange. And I really want to thank you first and foremost for taking part in this conversation, and certainly for coming and gracing the stage next year.
Thank you. Can I just say one thing? This is absolutely what I love. I'm extremely looking forward to MP 2025, which is like a hotspot for all the latest trends and innovation and payments. I cannot wait to see what next year. So anyone who's watching this, if this excites you or anything else, join us at MP, and do not forget about the embedded finance talk. And find me behind the stage.
Yeah, I mean, I will make sure that people find you. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for listening to this MP Talk episode. It's part of the MP 2025 conference. It's happening next year, March 18th to 19th in Berlin. I think we are literally closing off on some of the promotional tickets. They're probably still running for a day or so make sure you grab one. Thank you.